Hello everybody and welcome to a bit of a historical look at the G-suit, a pair of pants that basically won the war. Let us start with Wilbur Franks, OBE, an extremely talented medical researcher, and he has numerous notes and footnotes and, well, bits to be proud of in history with his work on cancer. His first footnote in history, however, was his anti-gravity suit, or the Frank Flying Suit, or FFS for short. Now, after the First World War, and as planes started to improve in strength and agility, pilots were starting to black out, and a solution was needed to be worked upon. This got worse in the early 1940s, as many of the pilots in battles lost their lives from accidents. Now, in the Battle of Britain alone, the brand new Spitfire was one of the worst for this. It had a 30% ratio of losses from accidents, and the majority of these were believed to have been due to G-locking. Now, what G-locking is basically when you go too fast, having positive G, so you're sort of getting pushed around, things like that. All the blood runs to the bottom of your feet, and you lose blood from your head, and then all of a sudden you black out because your brain's got no oxygen, it's got no blood. So this was a serious problem. Now, with Mr. Franks, he decided to design a suit. It was rather uncomfortable, this first flight suit, although it was tailor-made for him specifically, and it wasn't too uncomfortable for standing up in. The Mark Zero, we will call it. It was a pair of trousers that went up to the pilot's went up to his chest area, just above the chest. This was changed later on to go to about the position of the pilot's buttocks. It was made by Dunlop, the rubber company, used rubber, and the suit was used with bladders. It had bladders filled with water. On takeoff, once the flying officer was in the cockpit, to make sure it was somewhat comfortable, when you took off, the suit was then filled with water, and this would allow the pilot to be sitting and actually have the suit filled with water and then be much more comfortable. The suit did suffer a few flaws, however, as you would expect, but one major part for the early suits were the pipes, and often they would spring leaks and break under pressure, leaving a rather damp, unhappy pilot to land. The suits did have one large added bonus though. They did have a huge benefit, and that was the fact you could add hot or cold water to them, which meant in the winter you could have a nice snug hot water bottle all over your body, or in the summer even you could have ice water to cool you down a bit. However, this was a drawback once it cooled or heated up, depending on which way it was going, as it wasn't so fun to have cooling water around you on a very cold day. The other addition, of course, was the fact that you had a suit made of water. And this meant if you crashed, for instance, or had to bail out, you did have a fresh-ish water supply. You could drink with you any time you wanted to. The design of the suit allowed you to drink while you were down, basically, so it gave you an added source of water, which was very useful in times where you, say, crashed over the sea, where you have no fresh drinking water. The flight suit was used with the Allied Air Forces. The first planes to actually get the suits were that of the Fleet Air Arm during Operation Torch, fitted to the Spitfires and Hurricanes. Initially, the suit was shot down for being a bit too uncomfortable and very impractical for use. However, a noticeable increase in the pilot's survival, recovery rate and dogfighting ability made the suit quite worthwhile, and it became pretty much regular standard service for all Allied pilots at the time. This is notable with the US Army Air Force, however, who worked on their own version, which used air pumps and air pods instead of water. Despite hesitation, however, the suit worked well and was key to the Allied air superiority, and helped confuse the Axis pilots, who could not believe the ability of the Allied pilots. They thought the Allied pilots were superhuman. They couldn't understand how the Allies were able to pull these amazing turns out of nowhere and not pass out from G-lock, because they couldn't do that. They had great planes. They had the Bf-109, which was a very good turn fighter, but they were getting absolutely beaten by the Spitfire because the pilot could sustain such a big turn. Interestingly, the Germans were working on a suit extremely similar to that of the Mark 0 from Frank's flying suit. However, they had similar issues at first, that basically the pilot felt his body was going to fall off. Initially, this was the same for the Frank's flying suit too. What would happen is when you filled it up when you were outside of the aircraft, you would sit down and then there would be extra pressure with the water, which would cause more compression, and that would cause real pain. So the Germans ended up scrapping it. If only they had learnt from their mistake like Professor Franks had, and instead of having the suit all over, just have it to pods in the legs and to the buttock area, to constrict the blood in those key areas. The Germans never got that part right and discontinued the project in the early 1930s. If they hadn't, it could have had a totally different outcome to the Second World War, especially the Battle of Britain. This leads us to the next G-suit, designed by Professor Frank Cotton of Sydney, Australia, and the Cotton Aerodynamic Anti-Gravity Flying Suit. A professor at the University of Sydney, and was a specialist in physiology, and had a very keen interest in the strain on the human body. Having made one of the world's first human centrifuges under strict secrecy and security, his work would go on to new inventions. The suit shared similarities to the Frank's flying suit. However, instead of water, they used a compressed gas. The way it worked was with the G valve, which essentially was a valve with a weight system as it was pulled. So basically you had a weight in there and it would normally sit in its standalone position, as we can see here on the video, and as you pull a turn you can see it goes down. And what that would do is open up the valve and allow the gas to fill up the pockets in the suit, and then when it closed it would retract them a little bit. So it was a really interesting design and really helped the pilots quite a lot. This was a fantastic innovation, and it made one of the best flying suits of all time. Now, the G-valve was essential to this because this system really made the difference for this gas system, this gas pod system, and the pilots found it much more comfortable, and it did work a little bit better than the Frank's flying suit. On February 19th, 1942, the project was given the go-ahead and was cleared, provided to the Allies. Oddly enough, the same day of the Darwin air raids. Not an actual reason for it to be cleared, it was just a coincidence, one of those strange little coincidences. The suits were tested in numerous planes and were put up against the Frank's flying suits as well for trial in 1944. The RAF came to the conclusion that the Cotton suit offered the best protection to the pilots and was extremely effective, and gave us basically the modern G-suit, the G-suits we all know about now, the modern ones basically. This also led on to the Berger gradient pressure suit. Now, physiologists Dr. Earl H. Wood, Edward Bayards, Charles Code and Edward Lambert took both variants of the G-suits and started work on their own version. Cotton, being interested more in the human anatomy and centre of gravity than the actual G-lock situation, did leave a few flaws in his system, and the American team worked these kinks out very well. Their GPS, the gradient pressure suit, this suit was designed to work on specific areas of the anatomy rather than a large suit that covered the majority of the lower body. Their focus was on the calves, thighs and abdomen. This focus made the suit more comfortable and practical in use. really, to sum it up, it was a mix of the prior sort of two suits and refined into one that worked very, very well. Although it had a lower continuous G-force rating than the Cotton and Franks suits, it performed much better for fast manoeuvres and short-term high G-lock situations, while the other G-suits would work much better in a sustained G situation. So if you were pulling, say, 2G for quite a long time, the Cotton and Franks suit would work very well, whereas the gradient pressure suit didn't work as well in that situation. It only gave around about 1G of resistance for that sort of turn for a long term. Above that, it tended to struggle a little bit, whereas both the Franks and the Cotton suits would sustain a 2G load, but struggled with extreme G loads for a prolonged time. The suit was put into use in late 1943, while metal models were incorporated in 1944. The use of the suit was in the majority of fighter planes for the Atlantic, the majority being that of the US Naval Air Force, and their fighting in the Pacific. Breathing exercises and muscular tension were also major parts of this study. Another technique was to tighten your legs, abdomen, and then use a breathing technique where you would focus on your gluteus, lovely word there, the opening between your vocal folds, basically. There's a little opening between your vocal cords which allows the noise to come out. The most common technique for this is to say the word hook. And while you're saying that, when you're inhaling, you say hook, and you sort of stop on the K, and that will just help the gluteus just sort of open up a little bit more to get a little bit more oxygen in. And then when you're exhaling, I can't do it properly because I'm terrible at that kind of thing, but when you're exhaling, you go, and you just focus on the K, you do it very shortly, and that expels the air much quicker, allowing you to get more air in and out in a quicker sort of term, and allowing you to keep consciousness up to around about 9G for a very short time. But it does allow you to keep consciousness because effectively you're doing what the G suit does, but with your own body. Now, I did mention on this earlier about the Germans. As stated before, the Germans gave up on their G suit design and went slightly different for a different direction. Instead of a suit, they used a prone position or an almost upright laying down position, as seen in the Arado 234 and the HE162, which are essentially like a modern Formula 1 car, where the driver is almost laying down as they're sitting. They don't have their legs very low down, it's not like a normal car, their legs are almost level with their body, and this helps reduce the effect of G-force. This was actually a method tested in quite a few planes. The majority of the ones, though, were sort of sitting upright position, but there were some where you laid prone on your stomach. The Henschel 132, the Northrop XP 79, and a modified Gloucester Meteor F8 were all tested in this laying down position, and although it did offer very good G tolerance, it wasn't really necessary anymore because the G-suit technology advanced to such a point it was an impracticality to lay on your belly, and it wasn't very comfortable to fly in that position either. So it didn't end up getting adapted. And, well, that's it really. We have many variations of the G-suit now, capable of keeping pilots conscious up to 9G+, and with the ever-growing technology, who knows what is next? Will we even need G-suits in the future as drones become more and more popular? They also lack a fleshy, squishy thing inside of them. And of course that's the thing that limits performance for a plane, the human part. But the human part's always needed, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Will we see a completely pilotless drone coming along that will change the game completely? Or will we see better pressure suits designed for pilots to pull ridiculous G-forces? So, when I finish up here, I just want to say, don't forget that at their start, the Commonwealth nations of Canada and Australia gave the Allies more than just men. They gave their pilots an ace up their sleeves that helped them with the World War, that helped them win the World War at that. The G-suit helped tremendously for those pilots and saved a lot of lives once they were put into production and use as well. A lot of things have been learnt since then, but it all comes back to those early days. it's kind of funny. The most modern sort of G-suits are that's used on spaceships, space rockets, and they are basically the same as those early G-suits, but just a little bit more advanced. So I have to offer you a big thank you for watching this video. I really do appreciate every one of you who do watch, and thank you. There are hundreds of thousands of videos uploaded every hour on YouTube, and you're watching mine, which makes me feel kind of special. It's kind of a cool feeling. Well, it means a lot to me. If you enjoyed this video and want more military history, or if you enjoy sort of military gaming, things like that, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. Every bit does help. If you did find this video interesting and liked it, please like and subscribe to the channel as well, and leave a comment. They all help with the algorithm bots, which have just been murdering us small channels of late. Now, the video you've been watching in the behind there is actually a video about the FFS, and it's quite an interesting video. I'll be leaving the link below for you guys. It's a very well worth a watch. It describes the FFS in more detail than I did, but it also describes the act of passing out G tolerance on all of that aspect too in a lot more detail. I didn't really want to go into too much detail about that because it does get very tricky and there's a lot of medical terms and things like that, so this video does a fantastic job for it. It also has a fantastic 1940s person talking, and here we have the plane, and the person passing out is because they have lack of blood. You know, so one of those perfect ones. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. This is me, Carl Screezilla, out. Bye bye.